got tea and wine and as many mince pies as they can eat? Fantastic. So thank you very much for coming along this evening to our now annual CoCoast Christmas lecture. It's my very great pleasure this evening to introduce Dr Grant Humphries, who, despite all appearances, is actually a very talented scientist. On top of being talented at many other things, I'm sure. So Grant is actually the director of Black Hawk's Data Science, which is a company that does a lot of machine learning, spatial analysis, very complicated science, I would say. But for the past 10 years, he's been working with seabirds, and for the past couple of years, has been working in Antarctica with penguins. He's here to tell us all about the work he's been doing. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Grant Humphries.
All right, I figured I'd stand here for just a second and give anyone an opportunity to take pictures, because I'm just going to pull this hat down in just a second, because it's a bit, I think this costume ended up being a little bit tighter than I thought it was going to be. So, but I have to thank my couple of folks in the village who brought this to me for my birthday this year. I'm supposed to take this to the Antarctic with me and take a picture with me and penguins. So we'll see how that goes. All right. So thanks Hannah for inviting me, and I'm more than happy to be giving this lecture today. It gave me a good excuse to come down to Oban. I've always wanted to come down, so this is great. And as Hannah alluded to, the topic of my conversation is going to be penguins. So now, for those of you who might be keen birders in the room, this is not an Antarctic penguin. This is actually an African penguin. It's the only one I could find that had a cute cowboy costume on to go with the theme. So as you've come to read, the title of my talk is "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly: Antarctic Penguin Conservation." And you can imagine that what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly of Antarctic penguin conservation. Very, very simply, I'll go over some of the sort of complexities of work in the Antarctic, some of the ugly things that go on with regards to politics and science, but then I'll go over some of the really nice, happy, touchy-feely stuff, because I don't want to leave you all here feeling depressed when just before Christmas. So, just to start you off, I'm going to go over just some basic facts about penguins in general, and then I'll narrow that down into some of the Antarctic issues. And just to start, so some of you may not be aware, penguin is actually a Welsh word, and it was originally used to describe the great auk. The great auk is now extinct. It's been, but it was a relatively large bird that was black and white, very similar to razorbills and puffins. And of course, when sailors started heading down south in the Antarctic, they started seeing these black and white birds that looked a lot like razorbills and puffins, and they decided to just call those birds penguins as well. And for whatever reason, penguin never stuck up here. Penguin, and the genus name for razorbill is penguinus, so that one sort of stuck. And in fact, in French now, when you say pingouin, that means razorbill. But penguin, as we know it, is actually manchot in French. So. For some reason or another, we've stuck with penguin as it is. Now, most of you have probably seen these pictures floating around either on the internet or in the adverts on TV. I can guarantee you all of these are very cleverly photoshopped. Penguins and polar bears do not exist in the same place. I probably don't need to say that to this crowd, but just in case there are a few maybe watching in the world who've fallen into this world. Some of you may actually remember this little video the BBC put out of Adelie penguins flapping along in big flocks. It was really quite a thing for a while, and there's also this TV show, Adventure Time with Finn and Jake, that has a little flying penguin. And yeah, also, no, penguins do not fly. That's a if you see a flying penguin, you're probably drunk or asleep. So what makes a penguin? Well, the first is that they're flightless. Like I had said, there are no penguins that fly. There are about 18 species right now, and that we recognize, and yeah, the feathers, those big flight feathers that you see on flying birds would be too much for their sort of underwater lifestyle. They also have these really nice torpedo bodies when they're underwater, and combined with these little tiny, small, shiny feathers, makes them really hydrodynamic, so they can really whip through in the water. They have these large webbed feet, which are really good for paddling, like the ones I've got on right now. They're large with all these sort of adaptations are really good for swimming, and you have some really extreme swimmers here. Gentoo penguins, for example, can swim up to 22 miles per hour, which you imagine that's actually faster than most people can run. So all the penguins have these stiff tail feathers, and this is for balancing when they're walking around on land. Some species they're much more pronounced. So in what we call the pygoscelid penguins, which are Adelie, chinstrap, and Gentoo penguins. Those are the ones that we'll actually be talking a lot about. They have these really long ones. And you have other species like rockhoppers, macaroni, which have really, really strong ones, and that's because they use them to sort of climb their way up the rocks. The other really cool thing about penguins is that all species of penguin are countershaded. So they're black on top and white on the bottom, or dark on top. And the one exception here, obviously, is the little blue penguin, which isn't as blue as this. It actually is a lot darker when in real life. But the reason for this that people have argued is that it's predatory defense. So when you have a penguin swimming along close to the surface and you've got an orca or a leopard seal swimming underneath, they look up, and because it's so shiny with the sun, they can't really see that penguin. The reason why it's dark on top is there's a couple of different ideas, but one idea that's sort of swimming around in the seabird community right now is that these dark feathers are actually used for absorbing heat from the sun. So you can imagine these birds are in really cold environments. And if there are any adaptations they can use to take advantage of the heat and the sun, the little bit of sun that they do get, it is very advantageous. So penguins have a lot of different breeding strategies. A lot of their breeding ecologies are very, very different. They don't all nest on the ice. They don't all nest on rocks. So you have species like the emperor penguin. Most of you probably know about the emperor penguin by watching Happy Feet or March of the Penguins and all this. And that's just one species, it's the emperor penguin. Most other species, like for example the yellow-eyed penguin, which are only found in New Zealand, they actually nest in sort of forested areas. And I've been sort of crawling through the forest in New Zealand before, and have opened up the bushes to have a penguin sort of staring at me in the face. And they're really quite impressive anyways, the variability in their breeding strategies. The other thing too that comes up a lot is that penguins mate for life. This isn't necessarily true. Not all species do that. There is a movie about this, in case anyone is interested in trying to find this. But species like the emperor penguin, for example, which are often thought to mate for life, are actually socially monogamous. That means they're sort of like us. They have relationships and they move on. And that's because when you're an emperor penguin who lives in an extreme environment, you can't necessarily afford to wait for your partner to come back if they're late for some reason. So they'll find a new partner. Other species, like the Magellanic penguin, they tend to mate for life. So you have two couples, I should say, that have been recorded as being with the same partner for, I think, 13 to 16 years, I think, is the record right now for them. So like I was saying before, penguins and polar bears don't occur in the same place. We know polar bears are in the northern hemisphere and in the Arctic. Penguins are distributed entirely in the southern hemisphere. And the interesting thing is that they actually go as far north as the Galapagos. There's one species that nests up there, the Galapagos penguin. They go right up the west coast of South America, and all around sort of South Africa. Mostly you find them sort of in the Antarctic, subantarctic islands, and around New Zealand, and certainly even as far into southern Australia. So down in New Zealand we have the yellow-eyed penguin. Up through sort of in this region we've got African penguin, Humboldt penguin, Magellanic. These are the penguins we're going to talk a little bit more about. These are what we call the Antarctic penguins, which are the Adelie penguins, chinstrap penguins, Gentoo penguins, and emperor penguins. Emperor penguins are the only ones that breed solely in Antarctica. Gentoos, chinstraps, and Adelies you can find on some of the offshore islands, but emperor penguins are totally bound to the Antarctic sea ice. Back to New Zealand, we have little blues, northern rockhoppers, and then all of these really cool crested penguins like macaronis and stuff. You'll find them all throughout these subantarctic islands. Then you've got the really cool king penguins, which are my favorite, and you'll get those in places like South Georgia. And actually, I've got some 360 video to show and some pictures of some of their colonies from South Georgia. And these are like 100,000 plus birds all squat together in really, really dense colonies. So they're really quite a cool bird. So in the Antarctic proper, we know there's about 660 breeding sites for the 4 species of penguins, and they're distributed something like this. In through this area right here where you can see my mouse is, all these like sort of individual spots that are sort of out in the sea ice, these are all entirely emperor penguin colonies. Other emperor penguin colonies are sort of scattered in and throughout the continent. all below 60 degrees south, so all below the Antarctic Circle. So they're true Antarctic penguins. Adelie penguins are sort of spread all throughout, except for this region right here. For whatever reason, I think it's primarily because the sea ice is so extended out here, there's just no breeding habitat. But the Adelie penguins, you'll get them all through here, and then right on up through the peninsula. Gentoo and chinstrap, though, are much more northern species, so they're warmer weather species, so that you'll get them sort of in the northern parts of the what's called the Antarctic Peninsula, and their biggest colonies of like chinstrap penguins, for example, are all found right here, and you get really monster Gentoo penguin colonies sort of in through this region as well. And now these numbers are estimates. They're sort of our best estimates at the time for the time being. And we're still working on trying to figure out how to come up with these sort of numbers. Now this is the number of nests. So if you multiply this by 2, this is the number of breeding individuals. And then you can make estimates out from that as to the number of actual individuals. So the reason why we're only interested in the number of nests is because this is sort of what we call the viable population or the breeding population. These are the guys that will recruit year after year. So for conservation, these are sort of the important birds. So emperor penguins, so the colors that I have here, so emperor penguins in red means that they're declining. Green means they're going up. Then we've got these other 3 species here that nest in the Antarctic that are yellow. That's because they're either not really going up, not really going down, or we just don't know. So with regards to Gentoo penguins, we've got pretty good evidence, and we've seen ourselves when we go down to the peninsula colonies that are just exploding. We've got emperor penguin colonies. We know they're declining. There's a lot of really good long-term studies on emperor penguins that have been showing this. Chinstrap penguins, the issue with chinstrap penguins is they occur in places where not many people go. And so what happens is we've got lots of counts that are from like the 1980s and 1990s, but nothing since. So we don't really know what's going on. This is sort of our best guess based on that. They may be declining. There's some evidence of that, but we don't know. Adelie penguins are kind of a cool story because they've got a group of them have sort of set up on this northern part of the Antarctic Peninsula, and it's a really interesting place because it's one of the fastest warming places in the world. So they're losing sea ice there faster than anywhere else. And so what's happened is the population there has totally crashed, and there's colonies that are almost extinct, colonies that have gone extinct, and these are really, really big colonies. However, when you come around to the other side of the Antarctic, down towards the Ross Sea, so that's sort of on if you remember that map that I showed, right here, down in this Ross Sea area right here, the colonies of Adelie penguins are actually increasing very, very rapidly. This is very different. And you come over to East Antarctica, and through here, the populations are actually quite stable. So when you look at it, the population of Adelie penguin, even though we hear a lot in the media about, penguins are going extinct and penguins are going extinct because of this, that, and the other thing, we're actually not quite sure when it comes to Adelie penguins. We are sure for emperors. Now, what is interesting, though, is that Gentoo and emperor are the only 2 out of this list that are on the IUCN threatened list. Even though we know Gentoo penguin populations are increasing in the Antarctic, they're still on there. And that may change in the future. We don't know. We're still not at a point where we're ready to revisit that. So the other cool thing about penguins is, like I was saying, these guys are extreme animals. They live in extreme environments. Emperor penguins are the deepest diving birds in the world and dive deeper in some cases than some marine mammals. These guys have been recorded diving down to almost 600 meters in depth for almost 20 minutes, I think is what it is. So it's pretty impressive. There was one individual that was making regular 450 meter dives over and over again until it finally dove down to 550 meters at one point. But typically their sort of like average dive will actually be about from 100 to 150 meters in depth. So, and then of course there's the ice and cold. We know that emperor penguins actually stick it out through the wintertime in the Antarctic, places where we get some of the coldest recorded temperatures on the planet. So they're tough animals. And they also, what's really cool about the Antarctic is there's a very, very simple food web. And I use that loosely because simple is relative here, but krill is this, their mainstay is this organism called krill, Antarctic krill, these little shrimpy-like things that float around. But Antarctic krill make up the world's largest marine biomass that's not plankton, that's not like phytoplankton. These guys are something like 500 billion tons estimated. Of course, that number can go up and down depending on who you talk to. But these guys are eaten by everything: blue whales, crab-eater seals, all the penguins, fish, squid, you name it. These guys are eaten by it. So they're a real mainstay. And what's happened is, because of that and the extreme environments, this sort of simple food web has come about. The only thing that really eats penguins are leopard seals and killer whales. You will get skua, which are a species of bird that nest down there. They'll sometimes take chicks, usually weak chicks or chicks that have been separated from the groups. But the real predators are the killer whales and leopard seals. And leopard seals will take them right off the ice, very gingerly, actually. It's quite a funny thing to watch, to see these little baby penguins set up on the edge of the ice or on the edge of the rocks looking down, and then a leopard seal will very carefully lift its head out of the water, grab one, and then disappear under the water. And then so, like I said before, I didn't want to end this talk on a sad note, so I'm going to start with sort of the ugly part of Antarctic penguin conservation. And I don't know where I took this picture of myself, but it's out there in the world somewhere, so don't look for it. Of course, so I'll go over some of the major threats. Obviously, the big one that you hear about in the media is climate change. It is a real threat. The extent to which is a bit misunderstood. With emperor penguins, it's a very clear relationship between the amount of breeding area that they have. Because emperor penguins need the sea ice to breed on. When you lose sea ice, obviously they lose their breeding habitat. They just can't breed. With Adelie penguins, it's a little bit different though, because sea ice, they don't breed on the sea ice, but what they do is they eat primarily those little Antarctic krill that I was talking about. And Antarctic krill requires sea ice to breed, so they need the sea ice to be able to recruit year after year. And so when you have areas like in the northern Antarctic Peninsula where there's not as much sea ice anymore, the krill in that area can't recruit so much, and they're not recruiting as much, so their population is hypothetically going down. And again, that depends on who you talk to, but so there is a link, but it's not the same as sort of the more obvious ones. There are all these other complex issues with climate change regarding like how it'll affect fish stocks, how it'll affect squid and all this, which are prey for the other Antarctic penguin species. The other issue, which is not discussed very frequently in the Antarctic setting, is marine plastics. This is becoming a big issue and was brought up this last year at CAMLAR, which is the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. This is a group that meets every year to discuss and make decisions on management for the Antarctic. And one of the things that came up this year was, in fact, microplastics and plastics, and they've been finding more and more microplastics in the system over the last 5 years, and it's in some cases is about 5 to 10 times worse than what they originally thought it would be. The other big issue in the Antarctic that's again not really discussed in the mainstream media is invasive species. So this would be things like mosses that might come off of people's shoes, or like disease vectors that get transmitted through the ecosystem. And I'll talk a little bit about one particular case here in a minute. But this is becoming an issue, particularly as tourism increases in the Antarctic. So climate change, like I had mentioned before, climate change is a big issue with regards to the sea ice. The other thing too is actually ocean acidification, which is occurring down there. Maybe not on the same scale as you get in sort of coral reefs and all that, but it is still occurring, and there is evidence of bleaching of organisms down there, and little planktonic organisms that have calcium carbonate shells are particularly susceptible to ocean acidification. That's because their shells actually break down with the increased acidity. So I want to show you, so this is coming back to this plastic issue. I want to show you this little short video here now. This is done by a colleague of mine. There you go. Something to make you cry for a few minutes. All right. Yeah, so as I was saying, the plastic pollution problem is becoming quite bad in the Antarctic. That picture of the seal, that was actually taken on Bird Island, which is just off of South Georgia, but more and more people are reporting drift nets further and further south. So as time is going on and people are leaving their fishermen are leaving their nets out, they are moving south. So I would imagine it won't be too much longer before we start seeing pictures like that of actual Antarctic birds. Here we go. All right, so invasive species. This is one particular case which I actually had not really thought about until I was down there for the first time, and that's houseflies. So the common housefly you would see in the summertime around your house is actually a really, really big problem now. What's happened is houseflies have come down on the ships, and because the places like the Antarctic Peninsula have really warmed, they're now able to actually live down there. So they can stay down there almost most of the year, and the mosses that have sort of come down with them, they actually use that to breed in and sort of overwinter in. So these guys are actually really hardy, and houseflies are a huge disease vector. So as these little guys move their way down through the peninsula, it's very likely that if, say, you have sick animals on the northern part of the peninsula and they start pooping, of course, houseflies eat poop, what'll end up happening is the chances of them spreading that disease down through the peninsula increases exponentially as you get the temperature starts to increase. So this is sort of tied into climate change, but it is becoming an issue. And again, these mosses actually moved in because of people going down to the Antarctic, tourists and scientists and the like. Now they're doing very good now at sort of dealing with these issues, but it's anyways, it is getting to be a problem. So you can see here, this is my Donald Trump sheath bill. I thought I'd throw some politics in here because politics are a big issue when it comes to Antarctic penguin conservation. And just as a note, I have to say this, that this bird, the snowy sheath bill, survives entirely by eating poop. So, so the Antarctic is governed in a sort of a unique way. It's organized under the Antarctic Treaty System, and this is a treaty that was signed in 1959 by originally 12 countries, and this included like the UK and Argentina and Chile, and they decided then that what they wanted was that the Antarctic be put aside of all these world geopolitical issues, and it would be just a place for peace and science. And as time progressed, more and more countries signed. I think there's 53 signatory countries now. And so it's become this really sort of like beacon of hope, we might say, in the world. The problem is, though, is that the moment that things start to get a bit hairy in the rest of the world, it does transcribe down into Antarctic issues. So, for example, not naming any names, we do have issues with budget cuts in certain programs, and budget cuts can have huge implications in who gets sent to certain meetings, or even the way that they talk about certain issues. Climate change, for example, is a big one. When you have a government in place that doesn't agree with climate change or doesn't think it's an issue, then that passes down through the people who have to go to these meetings and make big management decisions. So that's when things start to get really complicated and really ugly. The other one that I'm going to throw in here too is CAMLAR. Now, for any Star Wars nerds in the room, you might actually get this reference, but people talk about things being a double-edged sword. I like to talk about things as if they're a lightsaber, because it's much more than just a back and forward. It's a back, a forward, a sideways, a left, right, and CAMLAR, I don't want to say it's a bad thing, because there is a lot of positive things that come out of CAMLAR. They make all the decisions regarding marine protected areas and the like. However, CAMLAR runs on a consensus basis. That means every country that's signed on to this convention for conserving Antarctic marine living resources, they all need to agree on things. And that's very, very difficult when you have certain countries that have different requirements or different beliefs as to what conservation actually means. So even though it's really great when you do get a measure passed that has a big impact and everybody agrees on it, you can have situations where a single country can hold that card and say, like, no, we're not going to do that this year. And you might all remember this being an issue with the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area, for anyone who followed that. There was one country in particular who held back, and that caused a big issue. So it is good, it is bad, but again, it's one of these nasty political issues. So I'll move on to sort of the less bad stuff. This is still kind of bad, but not as bad as what I was just going on with. First, now, people might argue with me about this, and I might actually get some slaps from somewhere in the online world for this, but I'm not a big fan of saying that fishing is a bad thing in the Antarctic. So the big issue in the Antarctic right now is the krill fishing industry, and I have another slide going over this. I argue that this is actually not as big a threat as people think it is. It is a threat, it can be if it's mismanaged, but as it is right now, I think we're still okay. The other thing too that comes up every so often, not as big an issue, is industrial development. Now in the Antarctic you can't just go down and build, you can't just do any oil drilling, or you can't go in and just build a base or anything like that. But there are issues around infrastructure coming in that allows people to, like tourists and stuff, to go down more frequently. There are issues regarding base size and base structure and things like this. So it can have issues regarding certain things like the number of people that are going down, which may lead to certain things like disease transmission or invasive species. But again, this is not a big issue, it just is an issue. So krill fishing, for those of you who don't know, is actually huge in the Antarctic. And actually the Antarctic krill are used primarily for four purposes. One is these little fish oil pills. So similar to like you get your omega-3 pills, they just have krill pills. They're used for pet food, they're used for fish food, and they're used for human consumption. Human consumption is very minimal. Not a lot of people do eat it. There are some countries that do it, but it's actually primarily for fish and pets. So a lot of sort of cheap pet food will have sort of krill product in it. Now, as I was saying, I don't think this is a big issue, and the reason why is because we've got our estimates of the krill population in the Antarctic is quite substantial. We're talking about 500 billion tons. On an average year, these guys are taking probably 150 to 250,000 tons. So it's very, very small proportion. It actually falls well under what the precautionary limits for krill. The big issue that comes up is when people talk about lots of fishing in one place. So you can imagine you have a penguin colony, and then you have a bunch of fishermen who are offshore, and they're just fishing and fishing and fishing and taking all the krill. And the argument then is that you're taking away the food from this particular group of penguins. But the fishing industry actually in the Antarctic is generally pretty responsible. There's a large group of them, the Association of Responsible Krill Harvesters, and they've been working with scientists to try and come up with ways to avoid these colonies and to move their fishing fleets around. So there is interest in conservation from the fishing community. So I don't think this is actually going to be as big an issue as people will make it out to be. Of course, time will tell. We'll see. I might get hit with that later on. I might be eating my own words, but we'll see. Tourism is the other thing that's happening in the Antarctic, more and more and more. And this is sort of an older figure here. You can find these numbers online. Just last year, I think there was 36,000 approximately tourists who visited the Antarctic. So it's quite a lot. And actually, only last year, I believe was the first year that large vessels were, so these are vessels that carry more than 500 passengers, were not allowed to go down. Prior to that, though, you could have big cruise ships. So the Hansdam, which is a big cruise ship, was going to the Antarctic quite regularly, and that one had, I think, something like 1,500 or 1,000 passengers on board. The problem with that, of course, is you have people just tramping through colonies and all that. And even though tour guides are generally very good at keeping people on track, you always get people who wander off and do their own thing or get in trouble and all this. And as I mentioned before, the issue with tourism, of course, is invasive species, people who bring things down. Again, a lot of the tour companies are very good at making sure that people are cleaning their boots. Some of them not so. Some of them are not as good as others, but generally they are aware of the problems at least. So that's a step forward. There's also no real scientific evidence. There have been a couple of papers that tried to look at this and have not found any links between tourism and penguin population declines. So again, this is something that's probably sort of an indirect impact. It may not have any. It may not actually be bad at all. There is an interesting thing about it, though. An interesting side effect is that it encourages people to want to go down to the Antarctica. Knowing that going down to the Antarctic, knowing that you can go, sort of gives that people that little bit of a boost to be like, I think I will spend $14,000 for 2 weeks down there, and that's got an interesting. It has an interesting perspective for conservation measures down there, because you have a lot of people who have a lot of money who are willing to go down, spend that, and then give a little bit of extra to conservation efforts. So there are benefits for sure. So the Antarctic is obviously a very challenging place to work in. The biggest issue is money. This is the Aurora Australis. For anyone here who's ever been to Australia or seen this ship, this is actually, it's owned by a private company and it's chartered by the Australian government. And just to give you an idea of how much this cost to run, in 2011, the Australian government contracted this one for 2 months for $3.375 million Australian. So that works out to about 56,000 Australian per day to run. So you can imagine chartering this ship to get down to the Antarctic, drop people off, bring them back, all this sort of stuff. You're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars to run this operation. So it makes you sort of want to run into a life of crime to try and fund your research. It's really unfortunate. The next big issue that some people argue is not so much of an issue, but I think it is that a lot of these field positions are incredibly isolated. Some field camps, you're completely by yourself with maybe 2 other people if you're lucky. Some of the big field stations aren't so bad. You can have a team of people with you, but you're with them for a long period of time, and that can have there's social implications to that. But there's also just the fact that this is actually a picture from, I believe, the South Pole Station, and you can imagine being here for like a year or more, and this be your view every single day when you open your window. It's a bit hard going. One of the other big issues in the Antarctic is obviously its size. It is a huge, huge continent. Now, you guys can all go to this website, discoveringantarctica.org, and you can sort of guess for yourself how big the Antarctic is. I'll sort of give you the answer here now. The Antarctic can hold 61 UKs in it, as I found out playing with this game the other day. So it's big, and there are not a lot of people, and there's not a lot of money to be able to look at this system as a whole. And so there are lots of gaps, and lots of places where people just haven't been in the Antarctic. And because of that, there's a lot of interest in trying to get down and doing some more exploring, getting into the ice and all this. It's getting better, and it's getting easier with satellite technology and such, but it's still very, very challenging to study that large of an area with the little amount of resources available to us. So, on to some of the good stuff. This is so the first, of course, is some of you might remember from last year, the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area went through. This was a huge win for Antarctic conservation, because 10 years ago, or 11 years ago now, I guess, CAMLAR agreed to start building towards a system of marine protected areas that would span the entire Antarctic. The Ross Sea Marine Protected Area is sort of like the biggest victory we've had so far, and this is getting better. So now there are proposals to move forward with one in the Weddell Sea and another one to move forward on the Antarctic Peninsula. And those might be years before they actually get adopted, but they're coming along, so that's promising. Now, marine protected areas won't necessarily protect penguins from climate change or anything like that, but they will mitigate things like fishing or tourism or any other human activities that might impact their survival. So the other thing that, like I had mentioned before, is that there are actually penguin winners out there. Emperor penguins, like I said, are declining, but Gentoo penguins are increasing. And even though we have populations of Adelie penguins that are crashing, when you go down to the Ross Sea, the populations down there actually are increasing. We still don't know a lot about chinstrap penguins, but I suspect that they're actually going up. And this is based on some of the data in one of the databases that I work in. When we look at population trends for chinstrap penguins, it seems like they're actually increasing. But we don't know for sure because there are places we just haven't been able to count. So this is an issue that's ongoing. But it's not all bad news for penguins in the Antarctic. And if you want some details on, some more specific details on how penguins are doing across the Antarctic, myself and Ron Naveen from Oceanites, not the only NGO that really operates in the Antarctic, put together this State of the Antarctic Penguins report last year. Now these will be annual reports that'll come out every year on and around World Penguin Day, which is the end of April. And there'll be details in there about different regions and what the population trends are like. This is some of the work that I've been involved with in the last 2 years around maintaining long-term data sets for the Antarctic. People have been going to the Antarctic for about 40 years or more, and through that have been counting penguins in a lot of places. Oceanites, for example, has been going down for 24 years. This is their 24th field season coming up, and every year they go up and down the Antarctic Peninsula and just get off on colonies, and they literally sit there with a tallywhacker and count away. So we've got this massive database that we've built now with, we've got almost 3,200 individual counts for the entire Antarctic. So this is the entire continent, from the 660 sites and about 100 and some odd sources. So it's one of the biggest databases out there for direct population counts that exists for an entire species range. You do have long-term data sets that exist for other species. There are grasses and all this sort of stuff as well, but for charismatic birds, this is one of the biggest. You can actually go to this website. It's at penguinmap.com, and you can explore. It's all open access, so you can just explore, click on sites, and it'll give you all the count information, all the counts. It'll show you population trends, and it'll give you model estimates. So we've done some fancy stats and built some really cool models in the background of this that you can explore, and it's all very interactive, and everything can be downloaded. So if you feel like you want to spend some time working on your own models, please, or you feel like you just want to have something to make some cool figures or graphs, you can go on here. It's a great educational tool for kids. We do have like a penguin detective section where you can go to Google Maps and explore the Antarctic looking for penguin colonies. And that leads into this, which is the advent of satellite technology, which is getting much, much better. So this is during this project run by Stony Brook University, Heather Lynch in New York. They had access. The project was originally funded by NASA, so they actually had access to this satellite here, WorldView 3, which is right now the most high-resolution satellite that you can get. I think it's 30-centimeter resolution, or just under 30-centimeter resolution for anywhere it takes pictures. It's pretty amazing. You can actually see individual penguins sitting in colonies, which is quite spectacular. So there's been projects. Peter Fretwell at British Antarctic Survey did this project looking at the power of penguins, penguin poop, and how you could see it from space. So using satellites to actually look at these poop stains on the ice, and then you can actually estimate the colony size looking at this. And in fact, now they're working further with this. So Heather Lynch and her colleagues have looked at using it for Adelie penguins, and they're now trying to expand that into other species. And they've also been using it for albatross and certain colonies, because albatross are big birds that you can actually spot on nests from these satellites. So, and this is getting better with drones and new satellites and all sorts of new technologies. We're actually at a point now where we can start collecting data faster than we can analyze it, to be totally honest. And that sort of brings us to this interesting project that I was involved with this year, which was to run a data science competition using the penguin population data. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with data science competitions, essentially what it is you take a bunch of data and you throw it into the world, and you give it to you let all the data nerds out there play with it. They build you nice models, they send you back the results, and the person who builds the best model gets a cash prize. It's a very simple concept that's actually totally taken off in industry. Some of the bigger projects involved in ecology would be like NOAA 2-3 years ago had a image recognition competition where they gave people a bunch of right whale images that they had taken and said, can you classify these animals down to individuals and give us the number of individuals when they show up? So essentially you could take a picture of a right whale, send it to them, and their software would just say, oh, this is individual Annie from whoever. So we decided to do that with the penguin population data to see if these data scientists could come up with a model that would outcompete the one that we had. It was really cool. program that we got involved in, and because of these new databases, these new technologies where we can get all this data, we're able to do this now. This is what I like to call scientific socialism, where you can give everyone data, they all learn at the same rate, everyone all has the same resources in front of them, and it becomes part of a larger whole, as opposed to people doing individual projects here and there, and then sort of trying to piece them together on the far side. This sort of puts everyone on the same page. The first place winner was actually hydrodynamics scientist. I believe he's in India, but yeah, he had never worked with penguin data before in his life, and he put together this really nice little machine learning model that brought it all together and actually outcompeted the one that we had built. So that was quite interesting. So now I'm going to give you guys a break from the lecturing and PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you guys some pictures and stuff. Now, when I was in the Antarctic, I was asked by Google to take some 360 images. So this was 2 years ago. 360 images for Street View, and I took the time to take some 360 videos and stuff like that as well. So these are just a map of some of the pictures that I took here as we traveled up and down the peninsula. So I will go here, and oh yes, by the way, if anyone is wondering if this is the first time I've ever worn a penguin costume, it isn't. So now I will go out and I will open up this app. That seems to have closed on me, but that's okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with Esperanza Station. So Esperanza Station is kind of a cool place. This is the Argentinian base on the very, very tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. And so the Argentinians are very interesting, have always historically had an interesting view of the Antarctic. In fact, there are certain maps of Tierra del Fuego which consider the Antarctic as part of Tierra del Fuego province. So they still have this sort of claim to it. And now Esperanza Station is the only place where someone has been born in the Antarctic. And typically what the Argentinians do is they send families down there and they just live down there. They live down there for a year and then they come back. There's actually a schoolhouse down here, and I've got pictures of that schoolhouse. Their research center is quite small. They do scientific research here, but it's actually just sort of a little village that they have down on the Antarctic Peninsula. So if I bring that over here, pop that up and do this, here we go, and we can sort of explore around. And this is, you can see all their buildings are all quite red and shiny. This is their common area here. This is their schoolhouse. This is a museum. They do have a little museum there. It's called the Museo Antarctico. And if I go back out and I pull up this picture here, this is their library in their school. And you see they've even got computers. It's very, very high tech down there. This is their gym and their common area and all that sort of stuff. So that's essentially the extent of their schoolhouse. There is one other room but there are kids, teenagers, preschoolers, all that, it varies in age, and they live down there for a year. They get one resupply per year, and that's it. So they have a ship come down and visit them once, drop off a bunch of stuff, and then they leave, and that's the last they see of people other than tourists. So it's a pretty remote lifestyle. The other cool place that I visited while I was down there was this place called Wordy House. Now, Wordy House is a small British Antarctic Survey research station that was abandoned in the 1960s or 70s, but essentially it was left exactly as it was. And now it's just this tourist spot, so you can go down and you can visit it. So I decided to do a 360 tour of the house while I was down there. What's really interesting is that this place is apparently haunted by somebody. I don't know who. It was like one blog post I came across. They had one of those TV shows went down there, Ghost Hunters or something like that, where they went around and tried to film, and they had heard some creepy noises, and who knows, it could have been a penguin outside. It's in a beautiful area. It's actually next to a place called Vernadsky Station. Vernadsky Station is a Ukrainian base, and it's the only bar in the Antarctic. And these guys were literally just around the corner from it. So it was. Here's some of the tourists. Here's me in my hat, and we cruise over here. There we go, inside the house. So this is exactly as it was left when they abandoned the place. And you can see some of the old oil drums and supplies and all that were literally just left behind. You go here. This is their outhouse, or their in-house, I should say. And they had a little pot-belly stove there for keeping themselves warm. Their entryway. This is their fire extinguishers down here. Of course, fire would be a big issue if you were in the Antarctic. And go here. This is some typewriters. They do have some informational signs up on the wall there and stuff like that. But these are all, again, all their original gear and all that was left there. This is one of their bedrooms. I think this was the guy Wordy. I think it was named after. I think this might have been his bedroom. There is a bunkhouse. Here we go. This is where the rest of the staff sort of slept here, just in this bunkhouse. And these guys were here a long period of time. These guys were just literally left down there. Nowadays, I almost feel like we're sort of wimpy when we go to the Antarctic. We have all sorts of like aircraft supplies, and helicopters come down, big ships, and all the fanciest new radio equipment. Some bases even have internet. These guys never had anything. It was literally them and this box they lived in for ages with a little bit of food. So you can imagine that must have been hard going. So that was Wordy House. It's kind of a cool little spot just out in the middle of nowhere, and it's been rebuilt. I believe it did blow down or was knocked over in a tsunami or something like that once upon a time. So this right here. So when I go down to the Antarctic, usually go down and I offer my services as a guide on board the ship. And essentially what they do is they drop me off. So I interact with the passengers. I'll talk to them and answer questions about penguins and this sort of stuff. And then what I do is I'll do at-sea surveys on board the ship. So I'll be up here in the cabin, usually standing right here or sitting right here where all these passengers are, and counting birds as I'm going. Or when we get off on colonies, I'll usually go off and count the colony while everybody is doing their touristy things. So this is the wheelhouse of the academic Vavilov, which is a ship that's contracted by their One Ocean expeditions. And so that's how we go down every year. And this year when I go down again, I'll be on board this ship. This right here is actually from South Georgia. So this is one of these king penguin colonies I was talking about. You can see down here, it's a bit hard on the screen there, but these are all penguins sort of mashed in through here. Comes in, all comes up the side of this hill. We cruise around. Spectacular scenery. It's a great place to be a penguin. You come down through here, and the colony, there's actually penguins over in through here and all down in through this. It's just a massive, massive colony. And you can imagine that this is actually not a lot of water that comes down through here. This is a lot of penguin poop that comes down through these rivers. Right, okay, so this is another really cool site. I'll show you a picture in a second. This is called Port Charcot. And this site, where I'm standing right now at this point, there hadn't been anybody who climbed up there and counted it since, I don't know, like the early 2000s or late 1990s, something like that. It had been a while. And I started climbing this. This is about 250 meters up. And I started climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And every time I got to a little ridge, I would poke my head up and there'd be another group of Gentoo penguins nesting on these little rocks. And you can see, looking up, these penguins actually go right on up here, and I kept on climbing and climbing and climbing until I got to this very top up here, and there were Gentoo penguins nesting way, way up on top. So these little guys it's unbelievable how much they climb, actually. I found something really surprising when I was up here. Something that I'll never forget, which was this picture. And you may or may not be able to make it out. Oh yeah, you can. Okay. See this? This is up at the top of that shoulder I was telling you about. This is rope from a ship somewhere along the way that somehow has managed to make it all the way up to the top of that mountain and has been integrated into a penguin's nest. So I'm not an archaeologist or anything. I can't imagine how old this must be. It may not even be that old. It's hard to say, but it is pretty worn and broken down. It just goes to show that human impact, it can be quite sort of like discreet in these interesting places. It's pretty amazing. So then we go, next place I'll take you to here now will be just outside of Vernadsky Station on this next slide. So this is actually, you can actually find this image on Google Earth. I put this one on here, and this is just some of the passengers who were on board the ship. I think Wordy House, oh yeah, there we go. Wordy House is actually, Wordy House is hiding right down there. Vernadsky Station is sort of like just up here and around the bend a bit. But here we are, just all sort of goofing off. It's really cool actually using these images. You can do some really cool little graphics like this. Okay, so next image I've got. Oh, right, this is another cool place. Actually, well, most places in the Antarctica are cool. What am I talking about? This is Deception Island. Deception Island is an old volcano that's collapsed in on itself. You look at it on a map, it's really amazing. It's actually like sort of like this, sort of like shaped like this, and you can see where the crater is. But ships can sail right on into the center of it. And historically, it was a site for sealing and marine mammal harvesting. So there is a whole bunch of like oil vats and stuff here. It was abandoned during an eruption. A lot of stuff was destroyed, but you can still see the remnants. I do have a picture, which I didn't unfortunately load up, of a seal on top of an old sealing boat. So it goes to show that seals have really come back down there, which is really cool. But this is, because it's an old volcano, essentially it's just this huge moonscape. You get these cool mountains around it, but all the land is just this flat, dark stuff that goes on as far as the eye can see. Spectacular spot. And because it's protected, you get, ships are in there all the time. A lot of tourists come in to visit. And this is where they go to do the polar dip. So they take you down and they tell you can jump in the Antarctic water here and it's going to be amazing. And what they don't tell you is that when you jump in the water, it's volcanic. So it's really hot. This is a place called Brown Bluff up near Esperanza Station. And the reason why I showed this picture is because this right here used to actually be a really, really big Adelie penguin colony all through here. And a lot of the Adelie penguins have sort of disappeared. This is one of these areas where I was talking about. You get these Adelie penguins who just started going. This is also probably one of the coolest days I've ever had on the water when we had about 60 minke whales and 100 plus humpbacks and stuff all around us in the ice and the water, and leopard seals and stuff up on the ice. And we could actually see the krill swarms in the water underneath us. It was really fantastic. And this last one was, again, this was the same day actually, and I thought I tried to get the picture of the whale in here, but you can see us all. Oh yeah, oh no, it must be a different picture. Anyways, there's us just hanging out in the water. So that one again, you can see this one on Google Earth as well. And finally, last but not least, 360 videos. These are some of my favorite videos. I love these things because they're so cool. I didn't realize how charismatic penguins were until I started doing this. So I'm going to take you back to South Georgia and show you some of the king penguins. This will take a minute to load. Unfortunately, they're quite large, but bear with me for 70 more percent. The king penguins, they nest in these big colonies, but you get these sort of like loner individuals who sort of walk along and they sort of pick up other guys and they slap at each other and they make all sorts of noises. And this video here is quite cool because as I was filming it, I was talking to my colleague at the time, and these 3 penguins came along and stopped right in front of the camera, and one turns the other, slaps it in the face, then turns around. It is a bit quiet. You can hear them sort of making noises here, and I'll just zoom along here to where these penguins sort of, there we go. So there's us. This is them making their little billowing call. There's a little chick there, one of those little brown chicks, oakum chicks they call them, oakums. Here we go, and then he turns around and because then we slap and then moves on, and then they just continue on as if there's nothing going on. This guy's coming to check out the camera. Very curious animals. We did have one follow us for about 500 meters, just literally on our tail, chomping at us. They're very, very cool. If you ever get the chance to go to South Georgia, take it. It's a spectacular place. So that's that one. This one here is some cute, fluffy Gentoo penguin chicks. Everyone loves fluffy penguin chicks, so I thought I'd show this one. This one was taken at Nico Harbor. It's one of the only continent landings that the tourists generally make because it's an easy site to access. So here's a Gentoo penguin chick hanging out, just sort of. Dude, you can't really tell the scale, but this is about a foot or so to the camera from where from where it's standing. They do come up and just investigate the camera and poke at it and all this sort of stuff. And you see these guys, well, they're running all over the place. They're very active critters. This time of year in particular, they're starting to like crush up, so they get into these little groups together and all that. So it makes it very difficult for here's this little guy running up as fast as he can move. Here he comes, there he goes. Yeah. And this guy, he doesn't move for much of this video. But you can see a lot of activity on this colony. And the final video, so when I said that I count penguins, this is literally what I mean. And this is a video I took of me counting penguins. But you'll see how difficult it can get counting penguins, particularly late in the season when the chicks are a little bit older. Because they're very curious, and a lot of these chicks have never seen humans before. The first thing they want to do is run up to you as fast as they can, and they all stare at you like this. And so here we go. So here's a group of penguins. Here's me getting ready to do my thing. And I've got a little tallywhacker and then just a little notebook. And what we do is we count a group of penguins 3 times. And we write down that number, and then we take the average. But when they're doing this, you can see them starting to wander in. And they start to do this. It makes it very difficult because you'll end up counting the same birds over and over and over and over again. And what should only take a few minutes ends up taking a lot longer. Here we go. Oh, I'm kind of cruising in. This guy is looking at me. This is they're really adorable animals for the most part until you pick one up, and then it turns into a whole other ball game. Adelie penguins are particularly bad. For anyone, if anyone ever asks you, do you want to work on Adelie penguins, say no, because they do this. They have this little flipper karate chop they do, and it just tears your legs right up. But yeah, so here we go. And there we go. You see, you turn around, and then they're completely surrounded me at this point. And that's probably me at that point giving up completely about what I was doing. Yeah. Here we go. So that's my 360 tour of the Antarctic. I've got a whole bunch of other 360 videos out there and pictures, but I figured I wasn't going to be running for 3 hours trying to go over those. And that's it for me. So if you have any questions, shoot away.
Thank you very much. Have we got time for a couple of questions? If anyone's got some they'd like to ask?
How are we getting on with the rat eradication on South Georgia?
So that's done. That's done.
I thought it was maybe completed.
Yeah, they've done it.
Confident they've got them all.
But I mean,
Well,
they've been working on it. The big thing actually was the reindeer eradication originally, and that's ended completely. The rat eradication they've done a really good job on. They haven't seen any signs, lately. So it's a while before we find out for sure, because it's South Georgia is a really, really hard place to work because it's all mountainous and all this. What it has been fortunate though is because it's mountainous, they've been able to target different areas. So what you can do is you can actually target one place, wipe out all the rats there, and very likely they're not going to move to the next place because there's mountains and stuff in the way. So they've done the work. And it's just a matter now of the continued monitoring, make sure that it sticks. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. It's made a big difference to the South Georgia pipit. Yeah,
and the teal?
The teal has come back, but the pipit has just exploded. There are places I counted on the one picture I showed you there, the 360 colony of the king penguins. While I was there, I counted 25 pipit, which is one of the biggest counts they've had in some of those areas. So it's like it's pretty spectacular actually how much they've come back.
Any more questions?
Outside Antarctica, of course, have penguins been eaten by humans?
Yeah, oh yeah. Back in the day, historically. I don't know if they do it in any of the I don't know if in modern times they do it. I don't know if in Chile or anything like that. You're not allowed to do it in the Antarctic, obviously. I think probably in a survival situation, if you were in a pinch, you might. But historically, they absolutely did, especially during the times of sort of seal harvesting and all that. Penguins were eaten as just sort of a source of food, and they were fed to dogs and all this sort of jazz. So just because you had huge colonies, and especially the emperor penguins are big birds, that'd be a tasty meal for anyone really if you were stuck. The Shackleton group who got left on Elephant Island, they all survived off penguins and seals and all that sort of stuff. So historically, yes, but not anymore that I'm aware of. I mean, who knows what happens in behind closed doors.
Might there be any impact from the collapse of the Larsen sea ice shelf remaining population?
Yeah, so British Antarctic Survey this year, or the UK delegation, I should say, to CAMLAR put in for a special research zone to be put in that area. So there's going to be ongoing research. Maybe. The thing is with big icebergs, especially if they break off and they block off access to a colony, you can have issues. You could have situations that it may actually be beneficial as well, especially if it opens up breeding habitat. So it could go either way, but we don't know because there hasn't been enough research. And this is sort of a unique opportunity to have this big chunk of ice break off from the Antarctic, and now we can go down and we're fully aware of what's going on because of all these the satellite technology. Now we can track everything that goes on with that piece of ice. So I think that'll be an ongoing question, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years.
There's one more question. Something maybe you could finish on, because we have some younger members of the audience here.
Yeah.
Is how do you go to become someone that gets to go and count penguins in Antarctica?
Ah, right. Yes.
And am I too old?
You're never too old to count penguins. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. I have people who go down. My career path was a lot of university, and then I got the right position at the right time. So I went through 10 years university. I got my PhD, worked for a couple years in different postgraduate degrees, and then went that way. But there are other people I know who went in and are guides, for example. So they go down on ships. They've just spent a lot of time outdoors, and what they've done is they've worked on their skills to be good Zodiac drivers, and they go down on the ships as adventure concierges or expedition leaders. And beyond that, if you think about sort of the British Antarctic Survey, Australian Antarctic Division, all these big bases that they have down there, they all have other people who work on them. It's not just biologists. There are engineers, there are janitors who work down there. You know, there's a whole lot of opportunity, and it's really all about sort of focusing on what you want to do and then making it work for you in the Antarctic. You know, there are loads of positions, loads of opportunities. You just need to find what works best. You don't have to be a biologist, but if you do want to count penguins, you can count penguins.
That's a brilliant message to start. Can you just join me in thanking Grant again for a really fascinating
When I was in school, I tried to do it.